Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and in this video I wanted to share a pretty monster build for the Hurricane that I tested out yesterday. Now this all really started for two reasons. One really being that I wanted a ship that would make quick work of the hammerheads and bounty missions, but two, also just because it's an infrequently used ship in my fleet, and I suspect for a lot of people. I can't really remember the last time that I've seen somebody flying one, mostly because it requires two people to be effective, and while turret gameplay has improved, it's not really perfect either. Regardless, the time came to build it out and see how she did, and the overall loadout is shotgun based. I think that plays really well into the Hurricane because you do have decent speed and agility while being pretty small, but also bringing a lot of weapons, letting you get in close on larger targets, and evading is relatively straightforward. So as long as you have a turret gunner in the back, you're pretty much good to go. The Hurricane can run 4 size 3 weapons on the rear turret and 2 fixed size 4s on the nose of the ship, giving you a lot of firepower. The distortion cannons, scatter cannons, are performing very well right now, which means that they actually strip shields incredibly quickly, and they can also cause some performance issues on the targeted ship. Now for my Hurricane, I opted for 2 size 4 Salvation Distortion scatter guns on the nose, which are the pilot-controlled weapons. Since the distortion guns aren't really going to deal damage and you're going to need to get a kill, the main turret is where you're going to be really doing a lot of the real damage to the ship, and this is where I opted for 4 Predator ballistic shotguns. Predators are pretty beefy and that they do a ton of damage per pellet. I think the DPS on 4 of them combined is like 4,800. And the rounds will actually penetrate shields to some degree, and they are still dealing hull damage regardless of how much the shield facing is down. So essentially what you have is the front weapons engaging to knock the shields down and mess up the ship systems, and the back turret actually firing for the kill. There is a little bit of a gotcha when it comes to this loadout though, and it's really the range. In order to be effective with either of these weapon types, your effective range is really under 1,500 meters. And the smaller the ship, the closer you're really going to need to be to get that greater pellet concentration. Getting in close to a hammerhead can be a scary proposition, but just kind of be smart about how you do it. You can approach it from the front and veer to the side and bust a hard turn to get behind them. You can start by trying to get up behind them. Chances are they're going to spawn in, you guys are going to go head to head anyway, so you just want to find a way to get to the rear. You're going to be hardest to hit when you're right behind them, but at least with the NPC ones, they aren't all that good anyways from a turret management perspective, though it's still a best practice to make your living back there. You're also more likely to take down the engines when you're shooting with the distortion, making everything a little bit easier because the ship isn't able to really maneuver in any effective way. Now, I find that actually with this build, the Valkyrie is the hardest target, just because you're not particularly durable in a Hurricane, and they have a lot of ballistic Gatlings that can outrange your weapons, and their flight model isn't terrible. That being said, they can go down easy enough, and even though I thought the Buck would be the hardest one to deal with, it really wasn't that bad either, and it popped very quickly once we started landing shots. Drill the Magnificent from PXP was my turret gunner in this build, and he was saying it was taking about 7 or so trigger pulls to get a hammerhead down, so about 28 total rounds from the Predators. But there were times that it only took about 4 trigger pulls. So my assumption there is that it was based on how effective my distortion rounds were at the given moments and his aim and how well I was positioning us to be successful. But who really knows? Scatterguns are also interesting because you don't really know the exact number of pellets that are going to be landing. So yeah, it's kind of hard to know like how many actually contributed to the damage that's being done to the ship. You are limited to about 140 rounds per Predator, so if you use the 7 number, you could maybe take down 5 or 6 hammerheads before we're needing to restock, though at that point you probably need to end up getting some repairs anyway, so it's not really that big of a deal. Other than the fact that you're spending a little bit of money on rearming your ship. From a component perspective, I went with a full military build. I had the JS300 for my power plant, I used 2 Glaciers for my coolers, I used 2 R76s for the shields. Though I still have some testing to do where I may mix in a Palisade or a Guardian at some point to play with the results. As far as quantum drive, I use the Atlas, mostly because of the quick spool time and the fuel consumption per speed being tolerable, which means that in a small ship you can actually make it across the system without having to refuel as soon as you get there. On this build, I don't really worry about stealth, mostly because I'm literally rushing in, taking down a target, and moving on to the next one. So like the ads that come in after you get your kill aren't real valuable, so you don't really need to kind of stick around and scrap. In regards to how well this build would work for PvP or larger ships like the 890 or the Idris, it's a little hard to say. We did test this build on Shaq's 890 jump, and we were able to punch through the shields to some degree, even when he was stationary, although they did always keep coming back. And I think what we really needed to see was a little bit more distortion firepower to actually get the shields down, which is fine. I mean, the 890 is a giant ship. It shouldn't really be taken down by one fighter. The Predators were penetrating the shields, but not at 100% damage, and we ended up running out of ammo. I think we took it down by about 25% health. Now, if you had two of these builds running at the same time, you might have had enough of the distortion and then more penetration to actually get the job done. You know, and when you kind of extrapolate that to the Idris, and actually ships that are moving, you know, I think they would kind of perform in a similar manner, but you do just need more support or just way more ammo that you can bring right now. The other consideration here is what we always get down to when you talk about a multi-crew ship, and that's since you need two people for the Hurricane, why wouldn't two single-seater ships be better bets? And that's a great question because there isn't a great answer. It's just the game always favors more ships because you have more as a pilot control, you know, as a pilot at your disposal in another ship than you do just sitting in a seat somewhere. So for example, the Hurricane has 2 size 4s and 4 size 3s. So if you had the 2 pilots that you were using in the Hurricane, you could put them in Hornets, and then all of a sudden you use that size 4 turret, and then you could have 2 size 4s and 6 size 3s, which is essentially bringing 2 additional Predators to the fight. Not to mention you have more hit points spread between the 2 ships, you split the targeting from the other ships on yours, and you are bringing more missiles along into the fight. You also have redundancy if one of yours goes down. So it may not make sense to run this loadout over 2 players and 2 ships, but from the perspective of this being fun, using a ship that doesn't get used a lot, coordinating as a team without having to coordinate jumps and locations, the Hurricane's just a monster, and it really does feel pretty underutilized. So I found a lot of enjoyment creating this build, using it, and finding success with it. So that's basically it. I'm probably going to be doing more fun testing, and if I find more loadouts that I think are going to be worth sharing, I'll certainly be doing that. Evocati stuff is going on right now, and as it gets to Wave 1 PTU, we'll have some 313 content coming your way soon. So stay tuned for that. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and take care.